In September 1984, we began our first skunk camps. Those are programs about 4 days long, held for 30 or 40 executives from all kinds of industries. The skunk camps came to be organized because the people who attend them are pragmatic around a series of promises, or actually blood oaths as we call them internally. These are our effort to boil it all down, 7 years worth of work, into a list of pragmatic, specific, usually measurable objectives. They cover the 4 primary areas: customers, innovation, people, and leadership. I want to go through them now in detail and illustrate a little bit what I'm talking about. Let's begin with the 9 customer promises. C sub 1, as we call it, and those are the indicators I'll use in each case. Build unique value added into every product or service that you offer. Remember that there need be no such thing as a commodity. Add 10 small differentiators every 90 days to every substantive product or service. Consider shifting your entire portfolio radically in the direction of higher value-added, niche-oriented products or services. To support this, you must reduce product development time substantially now. The real key here in achieving no such thing as a commodity status is that quantitative promise. Every 90 days, we believe you should be adding things to the salesperson's kit, adding things to the displays in the retail store. No product, no service should ever be allowed to become static. Always improve it, always make it better, always differentiate it. The second customer promise, C sub 2, develop and use hard-nosed, quantitative, systematic customer satisfaction measures based upon relative perceived product or service qualities. Tie these measures directly to performance evaluation and compensation, preferably for all functions. Remember, customers principally buy the intangible. The key thing here is A, the frequency of the measure, and B, the direct tie to compensation. Domino's Pizza measures weekly, IBM measures monthly, Milliken & Company, the textile firm, does an annual image survey. C sub 3, live quality in your every action. Involve everyone in every function in a well-planned, systematic, team-based quality improvement program. Post key quality statistics, again for every function, visibly. Update them regularly, daily or weekly at most. The quality issue has 2 equally important parts. On the one hand, the specific well-organized program, a la the Paul Revere Insurance Company. On the other hand, living the message with passion and intensity every single day. C sub 4, listen to your customers naively in all elements of primary distribution channels, regularly and face-to-face. Moreover, insist that members of all functions, yes, the accountants too, listen to customers directly and regularly. Develop direct, non-attenuated mechanisms to inject ideas collected in the field directly into the designer, buyer, engineer function. Every marketer should be in the field at least 25% of the time. We don't know how to make this one difficult, but listen, listen, listen is the key. And I might add, we understate when we suggest marketers ought to be in the field 25% of the time. We believe that number ought to be 50%, but since most are only in the field 2%, we think it's aggressive enough to stop at 25. But remember, our preference is fully half the time. C sub 5, another version of listening. Tailor every product or service offering that you sell internationally. Relationships are more important than substance in most international markets. Be patient, learn the language. Listen, patience, tailor the product. C sub 6, provide rigorous, ongoing, overkill customer service training for all your marketing heroes. Start with the receptionists, the mailroom clerks, and the accounts receivable team. The magic of the LL Bean Sporting Goods Company is the extraordinary level of training that the people who answer the phones have. That's where it begins. The next, C sub 7, consider radical over-investment in your direct sales and service force, or in your sales and service force in support of distributors, the trade, franchisees. The key word here is overinvestment. Remember Frito-Lay, 10,000 salespersons to sell potato chips. Think radically, think of the impossible in investing in that critical sales and service function. The eighth promise, C sub 8. In the next 18 months, mount joint supplier, buyer, problem-solving teams in pursuit of quality, service, responsiveness, new business opportunities to cover a large share, at least 75% of major supplier, distributor, and customer relationships. With the new electronic and telecommunications technology, every major relationship between a seller and a buyer can have inventories reduced by 90%, delivery time reduced by 90%, first new product sample time reduced by 90%. These kinds of partnership rather than adversary connections must mark the lion's share of your primary relationships, or you're in deep competitive trouble. C sub 9. Get to the point where you and everyone else in the organization can state your strategic distinction, your uniqueness, as we call it, in 15 to 25 words or less. Test the level of agreement randomly and regularly with new and old employees alike. We suggest to our seminar participants the dirtiest of all questions. Ask an employee hired no more than 2 weeks ago if she or he can state in 15 to 25 words or less what it is that's special. What is your strategic distinction? If they can't do it, and if it doesn't match your 15 to 25 word description, then we say, quite simply, you don't have a strategy. Test yourself if you've got the guts. That's the last of our customer promises. Let's now move on to the 9 promises in the area of innovation. I sub 1, establish for every profit center a tough quantitative target for percent of revenues stemming from new products and services introduced in the last 24 months. If there is a single key to the continued vitality of the 3M company, it is that they insist that every division selling exotic products or old-timers like sandpaper set for itself a self-renewing quantitative target relative to products and services introduced in the last 24 months. Quantitative, one more time, is key. You can measure innovation, and indeed we think you must. That's why we put the promise first on the innovation list. I sub 2, invest in a sizable enough portfolio of small beginnings to ensure a constant flow of new products and services. Remember that the odds for any one project being successful are very, very low. Remember, big ends principally come from small beginnings. Quite simply, it's a game of at-bats and a game of tries. Those who win, from computer software to retailing to banking, are constantly attempting small starts to get on with the program. I sub 3, turn it to 10. That is, make something practical, make a test product, make a model, get on with a hard practical test. Cut current time to tangible test, as we call it, by 75% across the board in the next 18 months. In conjunction with this, do joint product and service development with lead users, that is, those on the front edge, as often as possible. Quite simply, we cannot afford anymore, given the new environment with so many small international competitors, 18 months before we test a new product or test a new service. We must get it into the marketplace and get it into the marketplace quickly. That, for example, has been the key to Citibank's continuing dominance, particularly in the retail banking arena. I sub 4, staff your new product and service development teams from the beginning with full-time people from all primary functions. That is, sales, marketing, manufacturing or operations, purchasing, accounting, and design or engineering. Quite simply, the prime reason that product development cycles take too long is because not of the technology, but because of the wars between people across functional barriers. The manufacturers don't talk to the marketers and so on. The only way to avoid these wars is to put everyone full-time on the same team. That's the key at 3M, it's the key at PepsiCo, it's the key at Milliken and Company. We know no other way around those inevitable otherwise functional wars. I sub 5, the fifth innovation promise. Become an executive champion. Seek out, facilitate for, and promote champions and skunks throughout the organization. Develop a tolerance for their skunk-like behavior. Love them even if it kills you. Remember, we've said time and again that virtually all innovation in accounting or personnel, as well as in new service development, comes from a person who's a little bit crazy, a lot persistent, and very determined. You must learn to love those people, even if it does come close to killing you, because otherwise you stamp out not the primary, but the only source for continued innovation. I sub 6, actively reward defiance of your own inhibiting regulations. Find and batter down directly irritating obstacles that champions can't clear from their own paths. The ultimate in wisdom is to have the guts to reward people for defying the rules that you yourself so painstakingly wrote on a course of a lot of Sunday afternoons. But indeed, cutting corners, not breaking the law or violating the shared values of the firm, but cutting corners in bureaucratic red tape is essential for constant innovation. I sub 7. Model innovation. Live it, in other words. Consciously seek each day 2 or 3 opportunities to specifically identify with innovation and change at all levels and in all functions. Be caught, if you will, daily, applauding the new and yawning at even good performance that includes no bold moves or fast-paced experiments. Quite simply, you must be seen as on the side of the new and the innovators, not seen on the side of the recalcitrants and the slower downers. You must find excuses to be seen with those who are trying the new, to be standing next to them on a daily basis. I sub 8, create an Innovators Hall of Fame, and be sure to include members from all functions, not just the designers and scientists and engineers. The creators of small innovations as well as large, supporters of champions and skunks, for example, a store operations team that stretched mightily to provide a home for a first pilot project. Again, the point here is we must celebrate those who try, celebrate those who test the new, create a specific Hall of Fame, but above all, make sure it includes those unsung heroes who are just as vital as the ones who become more famous in retrospect. The final promise in the innovation area: organize new product and service marketing efforts around explicit, systematic, extensive word-of-mouth campaigns. Remember that purchasers always buy the new based upon perceptions of peers. Quite simply, to make an innovation successful, it must be sold. And new products seldom is sold effectively through advertising or traditional means. It's sold through word of mouth, through friends, through neighbors, and through networks. And we're simply suggesting here that you can be just as systematic about word of mouth as you can be about other forms of marketing activities. P sub 1, the first of them. Regularly celebrate small wins which are indicative of the superior day-to-day performance of 90% at least of all your employees. For me, every day is another day of brilliance. That is, I've never had an average day in my life, and in fact, that's true for every person in your organization. The person at the workstation next to him has 2 kids with measles and they're distracted. A machine breaks down for 2 hours. Somebody else has to take off for an hour to go to a doctor. Every day is a complex day of solving problems, and therefore reward for surviving and doing even an average job on each day is a very reasonable thing to do, and yet it's seldom what we do, to put it mildly. P sub 2, include all of your people in some substantial, i.e. at least 20% of the paycheck on average, profit-sharing, gain-sharing program based principally upon team performance. Seriously consider an employee share ownership program. We believe in the intangible. We believe in the psychological ownership attributes. At the same time, we believe that dollar incentives based upon productivity, quality, and service measures are critical and vital. It's another way of owning a piece of the rock. P sub 3, reduce layers of management to no more than 5, no more than 3 for any single facility. Moreover, consider replacing all first-line supervisors with elected team coordinators. If there is a single problem that will keep us from becoming competitive, it's too many layers, too much management in the middle ranks of our firms. We have become strong structuralists in the last year. If we don't clean up the layers, and I might add this is called for in our small firms as well, we simply can't be fleet of foot enough, fast enough, or ultimately competitive. P sub 4, organize as much as possible in all functions and all facilities around the 10 to 30 person team. The semi-autonomous, task-oriented team should become the basic organizational building block. The power of the 10 to 30 person group, and we're seeing it demonstrated in old-timers like GM and Ford, as well as amongst the newer companies such as Apple or Tandem Computer. The power of the small group is incredible indeed if we will simply unleash it, and this holds for the accountants as well as for the factory teams. P sub 5, assign your support staff people in accounting, personnel, MIS, etc., to work for site managers in the field rather than for a corporate or group or division staff. We're not against accountants and personnel people. We are against them when they sit in the abstract ivory tower far away from the action. We're not suggesting that you shouldn't have accountants. We're simply suggesting that the accountants and the personnel people must be part of a business team, close to the customer, close to the field, close to the action, and then indeed they will become supporters of increased competitiveness, not blockers of it. P sub 6, institute measurement systems that are clear, simple, credible, and succinct. Post-key measures develop collectively with the first-line people involved very visibly. Measure, measure, measure. Quantitative measurement of quality, service, innovation. Measurement is the key, but of an equal importance is that the people on the line are more than smart enough to develop all of the primary measures if only you will share information with them and make them primary parts of the measurement development process. Then, by the way, the subsequent buy-in to the process is infinite relative to the old pass it down, send it down from on high routine. P sub 7, involve all people in all functions in quality improvement programs, productivity improvement programs, 100% self-inspection programs, budget development and monitoring, plant layout, and so on. Remember that there are literally no limits to the capabilities of well-trained, committed people. That is, from Worthington Industries and steel to General Motors and Ford to the world of banks and insurance companies, we find that the average person is fully capable of thoughtful, intelligent, clever, innovative involvement in virtually every function, if only we will give them the patient, well-trained opportunity to do so. P sub 8, debureaucratize by radically reducing and simplifying paperwork and unnecessary procedures. For instance, reduce all manuals by 50 to 75% this year. And remember that the task cannot be delegated. So often we hear managers lament the bureaucracy, lament the paperwork, and then they appoint a committee to reduce it. But the committee inevitably consists of people who will lose their jobs if they do, in fact, reduce the paperwork. Don't be surprised if you do that if you get less than thoroughgoing cooperation. If reducing the paperwork really is key to revitalizing your organization, then quite simply, you must do it yourself. The last of the people promises, P sub 9, dehumiliate. Eliminate policies and procedures, almost always tiny, that demean and belittle human dignity. For example, rid yourself immediately of obvious insults such as executive parking spaces. In 1,000 ways, with things a lot less egregious than executive parking spaces, we tend to humiliate and demean our people day to day. Again, set for yourself a quantitative target of reducing a dozen or so demeanors, as we call them, every 60 days. Finally, there are 9 leadership promises. broken into two categories: leadership at all times and leadership in times of change. Leadership at all times, the first promise: review and modify your calendar, starting with a 10% revision in the next 6 weeks, so that your daily schedule quantitatively reflects attention to your very small number of top priorities. Again, we understate. We really believe that that change should be 20% in the next 6 weeks, but based upon our practical experience, we'd be delighted if you even achieved the 10%. But driving this, and the reason for making it the first promise, is remember that as a manager, we don't do honest work anymore, and all that we have available to us is the way that we spend our time. We're as good as what our calendar says we've spent our time on, and not an iota better. L2, manage by wandering around. Consciously live your vision, values, and priorities in your scheduled meetings, visits, and daily routine. Become a fanatic on signals and symbols. Pen notes on memos, invitations to staff meetings, agenda item formulation, and so on. MBWA is so vital. Along with that MBWA, though, comes this conscious attention to the tiny things. Who gets invited to the meetings, for example, that signal to the organization what your true strategic priorities are. If you call yourself a field-driven company and then never invite the sales and field service people to the corporate staff meetings, it's real clear to the people out there that you're not field-oriented at all. L3, achieve line dominance. Sales, field service, distribution, and manufacturing operations purchasing people should be overrepresented at decision-making and policy-making forums. Quite simply, again, we're as good as the people who are involved in decision-making. If it's only the finance staff who attends the corporate meetings, then you've got a company that is not oriented toward the business, toward the field, or toward the line. L4, the last of the leadership at all times promises. Promote people on the basis of their ability to create excitement amongst their colleagues. Excitement sounds like a soft, squishy word. We find, though, from observing people at places like Hewlett-Packard, that after you've judged numerous people on this basis, you can get just as precise, just as specific on your ability to evaluate the degree to which excitement is caused by a manager. And the reason for all this, of course, is obvious. Quite simply, when we see an effective work unit of any size, it's virtually always because the leader at every level has created energy, zest, fun, and enthusiasm for his people. In times of change, the first promise under that heading, L5, spend 40 to 60% of your time, directly or indirectly, on the single new strategic priority you are attempting to instill. Quite simply, at times of change, 10%, 20%, even 30% of your calendar will not do. Remember when Roger Milliken turned Milliken & Company toward an all-out quality effort, despite the incredible busyness of his agenda, he somehow found the way to spend 75% of his time on that single issue, quality. L6, unfailingly use promotion at every level as a tool to signal new strategic direction. If you're a senior manager, involve yourself in every lower-level promotion. Do not let any of these golden opportunities to signal the new way slip by you. Quite simply, the people who actually work for a living only respect two kinds of signals. How are the senior people spending their time, and who gets promoted? This can often be tough because it requires you to turn your back on people who have been superb performers according to the old way. But if the new way is to be credible, then in fact that credibility will above all be reflected in promotions at every level in the organization. And remember, if for instance you're a facility manager, you probably only have 4 or 5 of these every year. Don't ever let a single one of them slip by you. L7, develop and use a 5-minute stump speech, the political notion of stump speech, which clearly describes the new vision. Constantly stage events to showcase success stories and their heroes which support the new vision. Quite simply, and particularly at times of change, you are a dramatist. Every day becomes an opportunity to single out the new way and the people who support it. You should give the stump speech a half dozen times a day at least, regardless of how inappropriate it may be for a particular setting. That's what seems most to mark the Sam Waltons of Walmarts that we observe as the truly superior leaders. L8, substitute pilots for proposals. If an idea is plausible at all, vigorously encourage your champions to seek an eager sponsor in the field, as far away from division headquarters as possible. Test the idea immediately rather than endlessly churning it through the proposal mill. Test, 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 try, try, try. Don't get bogged down is the message. Look for opportunities to sponsor tests of all sorts in all functions. The final promise, the last of the leadership promises, L9. Formal evaluation of leaders at all levels should focus less on measures such as budget variance and profitability and more on the explicit question, what exactly have you changed lately? The outcomes like making budget or making profit are too complex to worry about these days. The real issue is everything is up for grabs. Every system, every procedure, every promotion activity must be changed if we are to meet the challenge of the world ahead. What have you changed? What have your people changed? What have you changed lately? What are you going to change next? That's the question that must become the drumbeat at the beginning of every meeting, at the beginning of every informal conversation. What have you changed? What have you changed? What have you changed?
This concludes The New Masters of Excellence with Tom Peters. And we have a question. What will you do within the next 48 hours to bring the spirit of excellence to your workplace? Right now, we'd like to share an excerpt from another Nightingale-Conant program, also by Tom Peters. It's The Excellence Challenge. In this segment, Tom explains why cheating can be all right.
The real world is sloppy and messy. Champions and experimentation are desperately required to deal with that reality. Why is it that some companies have them and some don't? Well, I think there's a single sentence that was uttered to me that was the most revealing key to this puzzle. A fellow in a company that's pretty stodgy said, when they get to the top, they forget what got them there, namely cheating. They become the paragons of virtue, beholden to the controllers. Now, just what's he mean, and why is this obscure sentence so darned important? I've often worked with groups of up to a couple of hundred people, and I've done the following exercise. Often we've spent 3 or 4 hours on it because I think it's so valuable to prove the point. You go through the biographies of any group, and I don't care what the industry is. I don't care whether they come from successful companies or unsuccessful companies. But if they're a group of fairly senior people, meaning that they've been promoted 2 or 3 times, the examination of those biographies always, in virtually 100% of the cases, reveals exactly the same thing. And that is that 100.0% of the people involved achieve their success because they cheat. Not because they steal, not because they lie, or not because they behave in an immoral fashion, but because throughout their careers, starting interestingly enough on day one, it turns out, they have brought people and resources and customers together more quickly than the stupid bureaucratic rules that exist in even the very best of companies would ever allow for.